Yeah, so great. Yeah, so thanks so much, Dawn, and thanks so much, Jennifer, Candice, and thanks everybody for joining us on this special occasion. Bonjour, bienvenue à tous, cet après-midi. And on behalf of the Brain Heart Interconnect Home leadership team, I'd like to welcome everybody on this special occasion. This is actually the second virtual event that we're holding together. And before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Ottawa and member institutions are situated on the traditional land of the Algonquin people. Our institutions acknowledges, respect the longstanding relationship of the Algonquin people with this territory, which remain unceded. I'd like to pay respect to all Indigenous peoples from all nations across Canada. We're privileged to benefit from the traditional knowledge keepers, young and old, and delighted to do research together. And Jennifer Gunning, who's the executive director of the Brain Heart Interconnect Home, and her team, today Dawn and others, and have been hosting some webinars, and in fact plan to go forward with a number of webinars every so many weeks as part of the BHI mandate. And I was just reading my instructions here, and Jennifer says that I'm supposed to serve the virtual drinks. So I'm here to keep sort of everybody entertained. But thank you so much for joining us. This is a fantastic turnout, and we're just absolutely delighted. And this is a forum in which you can help to really build our sense of a community and strengthen our focus on the things that we like to do together for Brain Heart Interconnectome and making this program unique. And folks may know that the vision for the Brain Heart Interconnectome is transform the prevention, treatment of brain heart conditions, improving health and quality of life for Canadians, and bring innovation and leadership onto the global stage. Nothing more ambitious than that. And so this is one of the unique features of the Brain Heart Interconnectome, not only in terms of the innovation, bringing the different disciplines together, but also the cross-cutting themes in which we integrate many aspects of research that actually goes across the program, whether it's on basic science, clinical research, or population research. And this included the patient engagement, knowledge mobilization, Indigenous communities, training, mentorship, data sharing, open science, ideas, EDI, and commercialization, amongst others. And today, we particularly focus on the very important aspect of patient engagement. And I quite often tell the story that the Brain Heart Interconnectome, CEPHREF, would not have existed if it weren't for the tremendous participation reminder from our patients that the brain and the heart conditions actually link together. And indeed, is our heart failure patients who have a network across Canada that emphasize their number one concern is not their heart, but it's actually their mental health and cognition. And this is something that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And please, recognize this as a priority. In fact, this is the fundamental moment in which you realize the brain and the heart are so interconnected. And they're anxious for us to do research faster and collaborate. And because patients tell us that they don't have, 7-10 years to wait for the result of research. They need the results now. And so this is so important for us to actually do research with a purpose, do research together, so that the research actually matters. And we now, this is the webinar that really actually discusses the value of patient engagement in research, and see some of the ongoing examples of how to engage patients, and really the exciting contribution that can actually learn from each other. Some of the teams are very experienced in patient collaborative research, and others may be new, but it's important for us to realize that the ability to co-design research programs so that it's true partnership is super exciting, and it's innovative, and we really want to promote it throughout the BHI domains. And as a network, we are very fortunate to have Dawn Richards who's the president of 50 Labs and the national leader in patient engagement, as the BHI's lead for patient engagement cross-cutting theme. And I particularly like to thank Dawn for her advice and encouragement during our long, harrowing journey of preparing our original BHI CEFREF application. Took a year to actually get the funding, but now the funding is here. I'd like to thank Dawn for leading this seminar and continue the leadership. Also, Candace Fortier for the organization, the BHI Secretariat, Jennifer Gunning, my colleague Ruth Slack, but most importantly for all of you joining us today, this afternoon, to share the learning together. So thank you so much for joining us, and I will serve the virtual drinks now and pass the podium over to Dawn. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter, for that warm introduction, and welcome everyone. It's really my pleasure to be here today with you. Okay, so to start off with, I would also like to honor the land where I live. So I live, work, and play in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. So this is a picture of the sunrise near my house in Toronto, and I feel extremely privileged to live and work and play here. I also feel it's my job as a white settler to understand the traumas that colonialism has inflicted on Indigenous peoples in Canada, and to do even my small bits in terms of reconciliation, to learn from them, to understand how I can better steward the land, and to honor them in everything that they've done through the millennia that I didn't live here. So a bit about me. I'm fairly new to the BHI community. So I'm actually a chemist by training, but it was really my diagnosis with rheumatoid arthritis almost 20 years ago that completely changed my own career to become one I'd never in a million years imagined while I was training. So you can probably tell from the picture, I don't take myself super seriously, but I know when I need to be serious. And I'm super serious about patient engagement in research. And I'm really passionate about helping people to actually do this. I think one of the misnomers a lot of people have is that many researchers are trained to do this, or take courses in this, or go to school to do this. And they're often not. And so I can kind of play that go-between role between people with lived experience and someone who's been trained in research. So part of what I'm going to do today, hopefully, is probably the more boring part of the webinar, but I'm okay with that. And that's helping you understand some of the foundational parts about patient engagement and research, hopefully bring you some practical resources and tools. But the next parts of the webinar are going to be a lot more interesting, probably, than some of the slides that I'm going to show. So I've got a few learning objectives for today. For the first half hour or so, I will talk to you about some of the basic terms. So we're going to lay the foundation for some of the things that you may hear swirl around when we talk about patient engagement and research. The second third of the webinar is going to, we're going to learn from co-presenters. We're going to have 3 pairs of co-presenters who are going to be talking about how they've done patient or community engagement in different types of research. And I think that part is really cool for you to see how they've all probably done something a little bit different, but some of the things might be really similar as well. Lastly, throughout the conversation, we'll be putting a lot of resources in the chat, which hopefully can help you in your own work. And I'd really encourage you to, throughout the webinar, go ahead and put comments in the chat, put questions in the Q&A, and we're going to do our best to try and get to as many of those as possible. So when I'm speaking for the first 20 or so minutes, please just dump anything into the chat or the Q&A. I'll have a few minutes at the end of my portion of things to answer some of those fundamental questions. And then we'll have 3 different presenters, 3 different pairs of presenters for about 10 minutes each. And same thing, ask you to be really interactive in the chat and the Q&A, and then we'll have a bit of a panel discussion at the end of the webinar. So I think we're going to start with a few polls, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can bring up the polls. We've got 3 questions for you. One of them is for us to learn from you the perspective that you're bringing to the webinar. And that's just so that we can understand where, if you're a researcher, if you're a community or patient partner, if you're a trainee. We want to ask you at the start how comfortable you are with some of these concepts around patient engagement and research. And then we're going to ask you how comfortable you are with the actual practice of doing this. And you'll see some of the responses are a bit cheeky, and that's okay. We hope that this will warm you up to get you started here. So I'll just give you a minute to answer things. And hopefully my colleagues can bring up the responses for us. Okay, hopefully people can see the responses. They should be on your screen at this point. So we've just got a few patient partners. We don't have any trainees today. The majority of you are researchers or research staff, and a few of you bring other perspectives. So that's really great for us to know. How comfortable are you with the concepts? So not a lot of people want to do my job, which that's good for me. Most of you are kind of in the middle, so hopefully we can change that a bit. And lastly, what about the practice of it? So again, most of you are kind of in the middle, some of you not so comfortable at all, and about a quarter of you are really experienced or comfortable. So we'll see if things change, maybe especially around the concept part of things as we continue in the webinar. So thanks a lot for participating in that. Okay, so let's go back to slides, which are like any person's safety blanket when they give a webinar. So some terms and words. We're going to refer to patient using CIHR's definition. So it's a fairly broad term. It could be the person who's living with a condition, has a healthcare experience, but it can also be the people around them that are affected by this experience, like caregivers, maybe family or friends as well. And the other thing here is that different people want to be referred to in different ways. So some people are fine with patient partner. Other people would prefer things like person with lived experience or person with lived and living experience. You'll hear from a person later in the webinar who'd prefer to be called a community researcher. And so at BHI, what we're going to do is, for now, we'll start with patient partner. But as we strike our committee and as we start to really get moving, it's really up to the people we're working with to tell us what their preference is. And so we may or may not shift our language based on that. In terms of patient engagement, CIHR has a definition here, and it's really about a meaningful collaboration. It's about patients being partners on a research team or a project, and they should be really actively involved in all aspects of the project. And you'll learn as we go through things that it's best to ask them how they would like to be involved in these different aspects, how you can support them, what they need to do these different roles as part of a research team. And then just lastly, I want to make sure that we're of the understanding that we're not talking about patients as participants in research projects when we talk about patient engagement and research. We're really talking about them being members of a team. So if you want to focus on this bottom quote here, this comes from the UK. It's really about us doing research that's being carried out with or by, rather than to, about, or for them. So just keep that in mind. We're not talking about participants in research throughout our discussions today. We're talking about patients who are bringing their lived experiences to be a research team member. These guiding principles are from CHR. They kind of build a bit of a framework for patient engagement. So they've got 4 guiding principles. The first one is inclusiveness. And the way that I always think of inclusiveness is that patients don't get to turn off their conditions or turn off their experiences. I'm not saying that those of you who are researchers don't take your work home with you, but you take your work home with you in a different way than patients who are like really bringing their lives into this. They have different motivations. Peter really nicely described that, you know, patients aren't patient. They need research done today. They need research results done today. So their timeline for things is often really different from the research teams as well. Another guiding principle is support. And so that's about creating a safe environment for people. That's about any kind of training. And this isn't just for your patient partners. This might be things for your other research team members too. How can everyone best support each other to do this kind of work? The next is mutual respect. And so the way I think of mutual respect is it doesn't matter where I got my quote training, whether that's through living with a disease, whether that's going to school for a number of years. The letters after my name don't mean a whole lot. We're all people at the table when we do this kind of work. And so it's about respecting that all of us bring different skills, we bring different types of knowledge, and where we gather that knowledge is different. But it's all to be respected, and it's all to complement each other on the research team. And then the last guiding principle is co-build, and that's simply about building things together from the start. From the start is preferred. I'd say, you know, even if a project has already started and you'd like to include patient partners, I'd encourage you to do that. I think things just look a bit different, and you have to be mindful of what tokenism and other things could look like in that situation, but hopefully we'll give you some tools so that's not an issue. So I'm going to guess that a bunch of you are sitting there thinking, well, like this is all fine and dandy, but what does the evidence actually say about patient engagement and research? So the evidence is pointing towards the fact that there are both benefits and there are some risks here too. Some of the examples of benefits are that patients have helped identify core outcomes and domains. I can tell you in my own area of arthritis, patients were critical in terms of helping researchers and clinicians understand that even though our diseases might be under control, we might still live with really debilitating fatigue and pain. And it's really important for us and our quality of life that be researched. People who live with different conditions know the burden of that disease, and they know what's possible in terms of participating in research projects as well. So they can really help you and your team tailor and deliver interventions and understand how you can have the least burden on participants. That in turn will affect your recruitment, it will affect your retention, and patients can also be critical in helping to spread the word about the research and to share it in ways that academics might not think about, and to share it in language that academics might not think about. Everyone learns and grows together in this type of environment, and we can't deny the fact that there are additional opportunities for funding in the patient engagement space. That shouldn't be the only reason you're doing this, but you know, it is a fact. So just like any other things in research, there are potential risks as well. I think that, again, to go back to what Peter said, this can be frustrating for patient partners because research takes a long time, and they want results now, or they want results on a different timeline. Their suggestions may not always be feasible for a number of reasons, whether it's budget, whether it's time, whatever that looks like. So that can be frustrating. This type of work does take additional resources. There is a real potential for tokenism, and we'll talk a bit more about that. You have to keep in mind that often patients are at the table, and they may be reliving painful or traumatic experiences that they share with the team, and usually nobody else on the team is sharing those types of experiences. So A, they're in this weird situation that they're sharing really personal things that often others on the team aren't. And B, resharing those things can be triggering in some instances. The part that I find a lot of researchers struggle with is, as part of our training, it's really ingrained in us that we have to follow recipes, we have to follow methods, we have to follow protocols. And if we don't, things might not turn out as planned. We might be criticized. Our results might not be as robust. And so this is where people are often looking for that kind of like magic recipe. And so that's scary for a lot of people. For me, that's actually part of the magic. And I hope that through our co-presenters later in the session, you'll see that they've probably all done things really differently, but there's probably some really common threads throughout what they've done as well. And so just keep that in mind as we go through things. So I just wanted to bring up a few things in terms of getting you started or helping you out with work that you're already doing in this area. So one of the things I always think about is, I was taught really young about the golden rule. So treat others as you wish to be treated. When I do this work in patient engagement, I elevate it to, there's really a thing called the platinum rule. And it's about treating others the way they want to be treated, not how I think they want to be treated, but like really asking them what they need to be part of a team, what supports they need to do this work, which parts they'd like to be involved in. So keep that in mind as you undertake this work. One of the really key things that could be a bit of an issue is this whole concept of power imbalance. And here, these kind of pieces that contribute to that power imbalance are from this CIHR ethics guidance for developing partnerships with patients and researchers. And if I could just ask one of the BHI team members if they could just pop into the chat these different URLs that I'm sharing, then people can have them. I'm also happy to share the slides at another point. But the power imbalance can exist for a number of reasons on research teams. And that's partly because you're inviting people in, and there are different hierarchies and status, people that are in control of funds and the project. There's a control of information. Some people on the team live with health conditions that they have to share and be really open about, others don't. People's economic situations can be different, and the culture that they come from can be really different, and working together can be a challenge too if people aren't aware of some of these things. And so it's really, I think, our job as people doing patient engagement to level out as much as we can that power imbalance, recognizing there's always going to be an imbalance there because we're inviting people in to the research world usually. I forgot to mention too that Dr. Alexandra King is one of the authors on this ethics guidance document, and she is part of the BHI team as well. Another thing to be really mindful about is this concept of tokenism. And often patient partners don't have a word for tokenism, but they can describe it really well. It's defined in this ethics guidance document as when researchers include a patient voice in their project, but unfortunately, they mostly ignore it. Sometimes you'll hear this too called like being a checkbox or just checking off a box in terms of involving patients as partners. The other way I choose to describe this to people, maybe this is saying a lot about me, but it's about being invited to the party, but being in the corner all night and not really talking to anybody and feeling like you're not really wanted there. And it can be a really awful feeling for people who are supposed to be part of your research team, but feel like they haven't found their place on your team. So what can you do to avoid some of these things, or what are some things you can think about in your own practices related to patient engagement? Well, one thing I want to give a plug for, and shameless plug because I've been part of a team that's been working on this for a few years, is in my work at the CIHR Institute for Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, I was involved in ideating and co-creating a number of modules related to patient engagement and research. And even though it's from an institute related to arthritis, it's just generally all about patient engagement and research. So it's not specific to any one disease area. So over the course of about 2 years, we created these modules. There are 4 modules. Depending on the perspective you bring to the team, you may take slightly different modules, and that's just to make it more targeted for the perspective that you have. The modules are free. They're available in English and French. They are online. They're narrated, or you can turn off the narration. And for each module that you complete, you are given a certificate of completion as well. So the goal here is really to help people feel more comfortable about doing patient engagement and research, no matter where they are in their kind of journey here. So that's one thing for you. The other thing to know about is the so-called spectrum of engagement, which a lot of organizations will reference. This is being used with permission from the International Association of Public Participation. So it's specific to public participation, but there are some of the SPORE support units, like the one in Saskatchewan, that have adapted this for the purposes of patient engagement and research. But basically, it can help you plan and look at how you're going to do this work. And so if you look at the top row, it moves from inform over to empower. And so these are as you go across from left to right, you're increasing the engagement within, in our case, a research project. The second row basically explains what this looks like. And the third row here is like kind of what this tells you about the engagement. So basically it goes from inform, which is giving a lecture, taking some questions, through these middle stages, which have a high, they increase across the spectrum in terms of like the actual back and forth engagement, to empower, which is where, you know, you would ultimately give your community or patient partners all of the decision-making process. So as I mentioned, for those of you who filled out grant applications to BHI, we used a version of this out of Saskatchewan called the Porlet, which adapted this for patient engagement and research. So I'm just going to throw a few tools at you to help you. If you're getting started, if you're feeling comfortable with things, these might be new tools for your toolbox. This is a great tool from the Newfoundland SPORE Support Unit, which is all about getting you to sit down and either plan in advance or even reflect partway through, or even reflect at the end how you might do things differently. But it's really about the who, what, where, why, when, and how to engaging patients as partners in your work. So some of the key things here that I like to pull out is it's about creating a safe space for everyone on your team. It's about listening to experiences, valuing them, and seeing how that might impact the work that you're doing. It's about providing different levels of support to people so that they can engage in the ways they wish to engage. And I always like to tell people to start early, like start before you've got your research question planned out, but being mindful, sometimes that doesn't happen. So start as early as you can with things. The next thing I probably can't tell you enough about is the role that communication plays in terms of doing a good job in patient engagement. And I'm not sure we're all great communicators, that we're just born with that, but some of the things I think that you should think about in terms of communication are, what are your partner's preferences to communicate? Do they want meetings? Do they want emails? Do they want something face-to-face? What does that look like for them, and how often do they want to hear from you? Do you have a point person on your team? That's, you know, their job is to communicate with patient partners. For researchers out there, I often hear patient partners say, well, I can't send that email to the PI because like they're just so busy and I don't want to bother them. And so if you're not the point person, who is the point person that they can reach out to? Is everyone's team's responsibilities clear? Are their roles clear? That's really helpful for people to understand who's actually doing what there. And are you communicating even when you feel like there's no exciting news from the project or results to report? Unfortunately, I hear this one a lot, where people say like, I don't know if I'm even on the research team still. I haven't heard from them in about 6 months. I haven't heard from them in however many months. And then you talk to the researcher and they say, well, nothing really exciting has happened that I need to report. But what they don't know, if you don't communicate to your partners, is that like you've been working on stuff and they're still part of the project. You just haven't told them that. And so it's a real shame when there's miscommunications and people start to make assumptions about things. In terms of avoiding tokenism, I think I've talked a little bit about this, but I maybe haven't called it out, that it's about actually building relationships with people. It shouldn't be transactional. It shouldn't just be like, well, what can I get from them that really helps my research? It's really about who they are, what their skills and interests are, what's going on in their lives. Have you shared something about yourself with them or about your lives with them? And it's not just them laying their soul bare to you about their lived experiences and about their potentially traumatic experiences, and you haven't really reciprocated back. The other thing patients often kind of get slotted into is like, just that part of your life that's the healthcare journey. And, patients have rich lives outside of that aspect of themselves. This is a blog about tokenism that some of us have written to help you or to help patient partners identify what it is and hopefully mitigating that altogether. And then there's the importance of actually having a budget to do this. And that budget could be time, could be resources, etc. And there's a really great budgeting tool that can help you with actually doing that and thinking about all the things that you need to budget for when you do this kind of work. Lastly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how you choose to acknowledge your patient partners, the opportunities to do that, and how they wish to actually be acknowledged by the team. So I'm really passionate about compensation. This is something I've written a lot about, and it's not always money. So there might be other forms of compensation that you haven't thought about. Often co-presenting is really fun, I guess. You'll hear and see people co-present later on, but I think there's like a richness to co-presenting that doesn't necessarily happen when it's one person like me at this moment. And authorship is another big thing to consider, or acknowledgement in publications. There are ways that patient authors can make the authorship requirements. But the other thing to think about is, are they okay to actually be named publicly as a patient? Once that's out there, that's out there. Would they rather be acknowledged? And if they want to be acknowledged, do they want their name in the acknowledgements? Do they want a pseudonym? Do they want their initials? So there's lots of things to think about here, but there's lots of ways to acknowledge people for the work that they've done as part of your team. I know I've gone a little bit over, so I'm happy to check the chat to see if we have any questions. And if not, then I'm also happy to just go ahead and go on to the second part of things. So just bear with me because I'll go into the chat and see if I'm not seeing any questions yet, which is totally fine. And we'll move on to the second part of the webinar here, which is where we're going to ask, or we're going to have 3 different pairs of co-presenters from the BHI community come on for about 10 minutes each and share their perspectives about working together. What we're going to do is we're going to have 2 of the co-presenting pairs go while we're recording, and then I'm going to ask my colleagues to stop the recording because we've had a request to do that for our last co-presenting pair. So I actually do see a question, and I'll just see if maybe I can respond to that before I bring on our first co-presenting pair. So the question here is, how can researchers address the inherent power imbalance that can inadvertently place them in a steering position while engaging with patients in a research process? So I guess I'm not quite sure what you mean by steering position, but one thing I think we need to think about is what's everyone's role on the team. So that's not just patient partners, but everyone's role on the team in terms of what we do, and being clear about that, and maybe even having a terms of reference. That's a good way to do things in terms of like who's making decisions ultimately, or is it a group that's making decisions? What happens if suggestions aren't feasible, etc. So I'll maybe put that out there, but feel free to clarify in the chat if you wish to, and we can take that to the panel as well and ask them what kinds of things that they have done. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Katie Rayner and Kimberly Cork to join us. So they're going to spend about 10 minutes with us talking about how they've worked together in terms of kind of a more basic science type research project. And I'll just turn it over to both of you for about 10 minutes or so. If you need any help with timing, just let me know. I'll pop in when you're getting close to the end. And thanks a lot for joining us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dawn. Can everyone hear me okay? Maybe Kimberly, I'll look to you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Dawn. And just while Dawn was doing her intro, Kimberly and I were messaging each other, and we decided we weren't interesting enough by just appearing here. And so we decided that we too needed to share interesting photos of ourselves. So I thought, while we while we introduce ourselves, and Kimberly will go first, I will show an interesting photo of Kimberly because she will she is this is about who we are, and then when I introduce myself I will show an interesting photo of myself. So here we go. Let's see if I can do that. Can you see that?
Yes, there's a fond
So
memory.
Kimberly, I was gonna say, can introduce herself and also tell us what this photo is all about.
Absolutely. And Katie, thanks. And I'm just going to focus on just briefly, who am I? And Katie and I are then going to get into roles, and also how did we get into these roles? What's behind that? But firstly, professionally, I'm a mediator. So I love the question about that power imbalance, by the way, but I'm not going to answer it. I'm also a spouse, a mother to a human, and a mother to a canine. I'm also a student in my own field, working on a master's, having gone through a whole research process myself. So I have some familiarity with research and the process. And in terms of activities, what you see here is I was an alpine mountaineer. I mountain biked. I boxed. I don't know. I a very, very active lifestyle, but I shared this picture because this was the thing that gave me, I think, the greatest impact in my life, was being in the mountains, the vastness of it all, the quietness, how humbling it was. So that's why I shared that picture. So I'll stop there about who am I and hand it back to Katie.
Okay, and so my turn. So this is a recent photo. So I'm Katie Rayner. I am a mother. So this photo is of my daughter, Charlotte, who is as about hockey obsessed as any child can be. This is us at the women's hockey league game, the PWHL Ottawa, which, if you aren't following, it's super exciting. And for young girl, female hockey players, it's just absolutely energizing to see what this is showing them and what this is doing for them. And my background is I'm the director of a lab at the Heart Institute, where we're studying really mechanisms of heart disease, and more of the brain as well, and how those obviously interconnect in this BHI project. So I've done research in the cardiovascular system most of my life, and it's been always something so interesting, and the ways that we over the years have learned not just so much about how the heart works and the cardiovascular disease develops, but also the ways in which the entire body is, of course, connected, and something usually that's happening in one place in the body is often mirroring and happening somewhere else as well. We can learn a lot from it. So I'll just stop sharing. And as Kimberly mentioned, we have a couple of questions that we've just decided to ask one another, or to prepare to try to share our experience. And our next question is sort of, how did we get here, and why did we get here? So Kimberly, why don't you go first?
Sure, absolutely. And if it wasn't clear, I am the patient partner part of this partnership. And I got to this point because I'm also a person with lived experience, or actually, Don, I hadn't heard the term of sort of lived and living experience. So just very briefly, 5 years ago, after leading that very active lifestyle, I wasn't overweight, I was a non-smoker, I hadn't ventured into menopause, I had low blood pressure, I had good blood cholesterol levels. I think maybe once my triglycerides were elevated. But nonetheless, I had a major heart attack, a STEMI, and diagnosed with diffuse coronary artery disease. So huge shock to myself and everybody around me, because I seemed not to have any modifiable risk factors. Coming to terms with that diagnosis and the event, and on reflection, I felt that perhaps the one modifiable risk factor that I did have was, how had I historically been handling stress in my life? And what was the impact of that stress? What were the narratives in my head throughout the years that might have, in fact, caused this advanced disease? So that's what motivated me. Also, as I alluded to, I'm still a student. I'm very passionate about learning. And so being a patient partner was an opportunity for me to learn and to give back, in the hopes that there can be less people like me that wake up one day and find out that there's something that is dreadfully wrong, that had been wrong for quite some time. That's it in a nutshell.
So, so as I mentioned, I'm the researcher side of things, the scientist side, and I'm a basic scientist, which is a word for somebody who studies kind of lab-based. If you were to walk in my lab, it looks like a high school chemistry lab. We study cells, we study genes, we study molecules, proteins, et cetera, et cetera. And so patient engagement for scientists like myself seemed a very distant concept. It didn't ring very true to us that, sort of talking to patients about the outcomes of our research, or what we should be studying, really made any sense, because in our mind, we were really just studying, molecules and cells, and it wasn't, experiences or outcomes of improvement. We were studying cardiovascular disease, so doesn't everybody want to, cure it, right? So that was kind of a very naive view a number of years ago. And then through, of course, learning from, resources, particularly that Don had shared with me as a so-called basic scientist, it became very clear that when we are studying anything that I guess could or may or is relevant to a disease process, or something that patients are experiencing, it needs to include a patient perspective. And what I learned is that sometimes, unlike in clinical research, it's obvious that you might say, okay, well, we're designing this study, what would you want if you were participating in this study, and getting feedback that way. But actually just learning about how little we know often it can be really empowering for individuals. I mean, that's what drives us, right? Which drives us as the bench scientists, the ones looking, at the cells and molecules. But it actually is just as empowering to anybody who, you don't have to be a biochemist to think that all of this is very cool, and it can be very, very motivating. So that was sort of how we ended up here and meeting Kimberly. Was we sort of said, well, this patient engagement is not going to look like maybe other things. We're not studying we're not measuring things that maybe sound like an experience you've had, because we're using cells and animals and molecules, things that are not maybe what you first think of. But when we asked for volunteers and said, anybody interested in this? I mean, anybody want to learn more and be part of this? We got tons of volunteers. We had so many volunteers. And it's brought us here where now we're learning from each other. We don't have as Dawn mentioned, we don't have a playbook on how to do it, particularly on the bench basic side of things. So we're learning together, and I think we're so far so good. So that's kind of how we got where we are.
Yeah. Dawn, how are we doing for time? I neglected to notice what time it was when we started.
We've got about a minute left. Thanks for asking.
Okay,
Yep.
no worries. I think also what I would like to add that I didn't share is that this is my third opportunity to participate in this way. The first study, unfortunately, didn't proceed. And we're at very early stages with Katie's project, or with the project. So I don't yet have a lot of experience about what this is going to be like. What I can identify, and perhaps this addresses some of the empowerment questions, is that the regular communication is key. Feeling like you're part of it because you are regularly being communicated with. There's information that is consistently being shared with you, whether it's an update, a milestone that's been reached, anything helps you feel like you're part of the project. And I'm excited as things go on to learn more about what my role can be, as Katie's openness and the team's openness to exploring what role can Kimberly have. Ultimately, I want to have some sort of a positive impact, and I like a word that Katie used recently about the accessibility of the research and the outcome of that research. And I feel like having patient partners can only help that.
Yeah, and just Dawn, I know we have one. We're out of time, but I did want to just emphasize that that's, I think, a challenge for researchers, because as Kimberly mentioned, the first experience she had, that the project wasn't funded. So of course, the sidebar I said to her was, "So you're a real researcher then, because the vast majority of what we do is not funded." So great, but that can feel very, just like anybody participating in a research project, it's very disappointing. But I can imagine also, as the researcher in that role, what do you do then? Because then you feel like you've asked for someone's time and energy and investment, and then it's not funded, and you're not sure what to do next, and it feels kind of like this dead end. So I think we're all just learning what to do next in those scenarios. Vast majority of the time, we keep trying, but not always, right? It depends. Sometimes we steer a different direction, and it doesn't always work. So I just wanted to kind of add to that experience. And so, Kimberly's new at it, we're new at it, everyone's a little bit new at it. We're all learning, but we're doing it together, and it's been a ton of fun.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I was going to say the main thing that I took from your conversation is, like, you're new to it, but you're like so open to learning together and working together to see what works best.
100%.
Toss that out, try something new. It sounds like you're well on the path with communication. So I'm glad to hear all about those things. And I think we could pull some of them in to our panel discussion too. So thank you so much,
Great,
Katie and Kimberly. Okay, so our next two speakers that I'm going to invite to come on with me is Sadia Jama, who's a doctoral candidate at the Bridge, and Sadia trains under the guidance of Dr. Smita Pakyal, and Adar Shear, who is a community partner with the Bridge. So I'll pass it over to you, and I'll come back on in about 10-ish minutes. And hello, Smita. You are joining us too. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so take it away, and I'll see you in about 10 minutes or so.
Hi, my name is Adar Shire. I'm a peer researcher at the Bridge Engagement Center. I have a little bit of stage fright, so bear with me. I'm currently a student in the community justice program. I work frontline services for 7 years. I'm co-presenting with Sadia Jama, a PhD student and a clinical research program manager at the Bridge Engagement Center. Sadia and I met when I found one of the research studies that the Bridge was holding, and I became a participant. I was impressed by how the agency incorporated peer research in like a real meaningful way. And I also respect the care and consideration that was given to me and other participants that were on that team. I hope it's okay if I turn off my video. I think it will help me be less nervous. Is that okay, guys?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
You're doing great.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Okay.
We want to take a little quick moment here, similar to our previous co-presenters, to acknowledge the traditional lands in which we live and work, specifically here in Ottawa on the Anishinaabe Algonquin territory, as well as recognize the territories of Indigenous peoples worldwide and respect and honor their valuable past and present contributions.
I'd like to take a moment to remember the contributions of 2 peer leaders in our community that the Bridge has lost along the way, Ted and Kelly. They remain in our hearts, and the legacy remains in the work the Bridge continues to do today. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Bridge model. The Bridge model means so much to different people in different ways in their life. It's hard to just put it in like a PowerPoint. It brings exposure to research practices to me and other people's lived experience. We help implement and improve research in our community. We get to learn about different research studies firsthand and the ways and how to implement those studies. I get to learn and develop people-first strategies, which means a lot to me as a person with lived experience. And we get to bring essential and non-stigmatizing practices to all of the projects that we do. The Bridge believes in exploring systemic causes of poor health and overall well-being and quality of life to the communities and the folks that we serve. At any given week, we have a meeting and discuss the upcoming work. We learn and conduct and implement research studies, interviews, develop research tools, etc. We build our strength in supporting peer-to-peer recovery-based support and help develop other supports to peer researchers, including supports in and outside of the things that we do at the Bridge, like accessing therapies and having different trainings to just have an overall betterment of like mental health. And we're able to come to the table and we have a tangible say in the projects that we are a part of. So, yeah.
Thanks, Adar. And so I was going to do a bit of a shout out to Dr. Pakyal. And so she's the PI of our research work, and sort of is taking is being part of the audience, and in doing so is really leading by example by sharing her leadership and her platform, which she's doing today, and she honestly does all the time, to all members of her team. Adar and I have the privilege, including Dr. Pakal, of representing a really large team at the center who are not present here with us today. So our approach, we really believe in this grounded. We recognize the grounded knowledge and expertise of lived and living experience as insight into the health of vulnerable and marginalized populations. We strive for shared decision-making. We have a community advisory board. Community peer researchers are in all aspects of our research, from design to dissemination. Adar spoke quite a bit too, the different ways in which community peer researchers, which is the term we use for persons with lived and living experience who work on our academic team. And we believe that sort of this equitable partnership approach allows a reciprocal transfer of expertise, co-creation and ownership, mutual ownership of research products. And so, yes, there are outputs like papers and future grants and those things, but also we believe in giving back to the communities in which we are a part of, and also that we work alongside at the Bridge. And I'll speak to an example of some of the ways our research does that. And so the type of research that we do is community-based participatory action research. And this sort of research, as Adar sort of really demonstrated, encourages sort of skill and community development. It works alongside community members to help sort of own the research that is done on them, which is often the case, and to sort of challenge those the traditional notions of research, and to redesign research that is meaningful to them and their communities, and that ultimately will have a meaningful impact on their health. There are so many of there's various successes. This is a simple descriptive diagram of some of our successes, but the first project that we did intervened on cigarette use, so tobacco use. And because of our peer-to-peer based recovery model, our wraparound supports, our co-development and co-implementation approach, we saw dramatic changes, not just in what we were actually intervening on, but in different other substance use. We also saw significant improvements in other areas where people were able to reconnect with their families, were able to go back to school, they were able to do things that we didn't actually set out to help on. And then some of the other things in terms of community development that we did, because as researchers that have sort of an equity agenda, we aim for our work to be sustainable and to be meaningful, and to challenge sort of the harm that research has done traditionally in racialized and lower income and marginalized communities. And so we really encourage other sort of outcomes. And so some of the things, for example, was the development of a peer-to-peer harm reduction grassroots group that sort of was one of the products of one of our original projects. I'm not sure how we're doing for time, Dawn.
You've got a couple more minutes, Sadia.
Okay, so a couple more minutes. Is it about 3 minutes?
You can have 3 minutes, you bet.
Because I do want to share a little video. Are you guys able to see the screen with the video?
We're not seeing it right now. We're still seeing your PowerPoint or part of it.
That's what's happening here. Okay. I think I have to stop sharing and then share the screen of the video.
Now we see the video screen, Sadia.
Perfect. So this is a little video that was created to kind of give you a deep dive in the everyday experience at the Bridge.
The Bridge for me is a place where we all feel equal, like we're on the same level, and our voices can be heard and our opinions matter, and we matter.
The bridge means to me a place where vulnerable people can feel safe and they feel like they're heard.
When I started coming down pretty good with my cigarettes, I used to smoke 20 smokes a day.
How did the bridge support me and quit smoking? By being there for me, telling me, you know, helping me out, giving me the patches to get off the cigarettes.
Quitting smoking, I come for the companionship.
We find a place to live. They've helped me with bus fare. They've helped me cut down on my smoking.
My role was just I was doing the smoking cessation thing as first started, and then I started getting involved with the pure work. It's been 2 years now since I've actually, like, I can buy a 20 pack of cigarettes now. It lasts me 5-6 days. But some days I won't even smoke for 3 days. I go out on a daily basis, probably 2 to 3 hours a day. Go and find who needs to do their follow-up for their smoking cessation.
My supporter.
Yeah. They do intakes and follow-ups and with the clients, and just make phone calls to them and see how they're doing sometimes if we haven't seen them for a while. Basically talk to them and see how they are, you know.
If you need any help with anything, this is the place to be. These people will help you out very much, more than you want to be helped, actually. I'm happy. I don't like to smoking. Smoking like 30 cigarettes more a day, about me. And then I signed up for this. I cut down dramatically. I'm down to under 10 a day now. So these nicotine touches are working. That's why I joined. And after coming here a couple of times, I felt comfortable and like family. Yeah, I'm a softie. Both hands, warm. Yes, they do a good job.
So hopefully that gives you sort of some of the faces behind the scenes and some of the work that we do at the center, as well as some of our participants. You'll notice that a lot of our peer researchers actually come from participants of previous projects, but also we're able to get a lot of peer researchers through our work in the community and in relationship with other community agencies and groups who also have peer workers on staff. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sadia, Smita, and Adar. And Adar, I want to congratulate you. You did an awesome job. I love that you're teaching our community here about, you just asked for your support, for their support to turn off your camera because that would make you more comfortable. And I just think that's a beautiful demonstration of how people can easily support others to do this kind of presentation. And I love how you shared with us that the work that you're doing at the bridge is not only impacting people's health outcomes, but you're creating this beautiful community at the same time. So thank you all for sharing. And before I ask for our last group of co-presenters to come on, I'm going to ask my colleagues to stop recording.